Okay, so we're going to go ahead and pick up with part two of the waste notes here. We were just discussing sanitary landfills and how we've created a more sanitary and hygienic way of disposing of our trash, and that will hopefully help to decrease leaching of any sort of materials into the environment. So here we'll talk a little bit about the economics of a landfill, how a landfill would actually make money. So they are large facilities that are expensive to build and operate. So because of that, they have to get money from somewhere, and they do that by charging a tipping fee, where the trucks that dump their trash at the landfill, they're put onto a scale and they're weighed before they dump their trash, and the fee usually averages nationwide about $35 per ton. And it says this fee is meant to encourage people to reduce their waste and increase recycling. But if we worry that if we raise the fees, because there is some thought behind that maybe we should raise tipping fees, which would raise the cost of dumping your trash per household, or even starting to do like a trash tax where we would mass the amount of trash that each person is disposing of when the dump truck comes to your house. They're worried, though, that if they start imposing higher tipping fees, higher trash costs, or even massing the amount of trash that you give off, that this could actually encourage illegal dumping of waste. So you could imagine if somebody's going to weigh your trash can and say, oh, you're doing too much trash, we need to go ahead and charge you extra money, that person might have the incentive to say, well, you know what, I'm not going to use the waste company anymore. I'm just going to go and dump my trash in the woods on my own. That's definitely a fear of doing a trash tax or increasing the price. Okay, now when we decide where we should put a landfill, we call that, siting the landfill. So here are some considerations that have to be taken when we site a landfill. It should be located in a clay-rich soil. We've learned about the properties of clay. It has very low permeability, meaning that water cannot run through it very quickly. So it serves as a nice little cap to be around a landfill. It should definitely be away from any sources of groundwater or even surface water, so rivers, streams, and other bodies of water. It should be far away from population centers. Basically, it should not be near neighborhoods and residential areas because of many reasons. You've got noisy trucks. You've got a lot of pest-like animals that will accumulate there. And then there's this famous acronym here, NIMBY, which stands for Not in My Backyard, that many people feel about a landfill. We all need and want landfills, but nobody wants it in their backyard. So the same can be said with stuff like power plants, especially nuclear power plants, anything that's going to have some sort of waste that we don't want to be around. We use this NIMBY acronym for. So we know where ours is located. Ours is located on 234 in Prince William County. We're going to go see it on our field trip soon, so it'll be interesting to see if it meets these criteria. Okay, so what are some issues with landfills then? You've heard me use this word a couple times already, leachate. What that would be, because we have the decomposition of lots of stuff that's occurring, so you're going to have a liquidy runoff that accumulates from the decomposition. So that's what this leachate is. It says it's the water that leaches through the solid waste. It removes various chemical compounds that it comes in contact with. And the EPA says virtually all landfills are going to have some leaching, even after they're closed, even after all the safeguards that we take. So leaching is, a reality that we have to think about when we're dealing with the construction of a landfill. Some other problems with landfills, we have methane and CO2 gases that are created. They are both greenhouse gases. They are combustible, so there's an explosion hazard with that as well. It says for this reason, more and more landfills are vented to release methane, and better yet, many of them use a methane capture technology to burn that methane to generate electricity. And so that is actually a technology that our own landfill uses. And then it says often conditions are not perfect for decomposition, so not much decomposition is occurring in the actual landfill, which means that the volume of trash is not decreasing. There was an idea that, if you've got all this trash and this perfectly, decomposition ready environment, that the size of the landfill would actually decrease as decomposition is taking place. But because they've done studies and they are not seeing very great rates of decomposition, they have found that landfills a lot of the times just stay the same size even when they're capped over many, many years. Okay, and then this is a cool diagram. It actually kind of shows us what happens with the trash of the landfill. So you've got your trucks that come daily and they dump all your trash. And we'll watch some videos of this in class. Then you've got these special trucks that actually drive over top of the trash every day, and it's going to be like a little trash compactor. It's going to compact all this trash down and make it take up a little bit less space. And then you've got this nice little system below ground here. We've got the system of pipes that collect the leachate, that liquidy stuff that's going to come out of your trash, and it's going to carry that leachate to your local wastewater treatment plant. Once we're done with a landfill and it's been all compacted, it says the landfill is going to be capped and covered with soil and then replanted with vegetation. So this whole area is going to be undergo reclamation. And it says any methane produced in the closed cells is extracted and it's either burned off or it's collected for use as fuel. So again, you've got this anaerobic decomposition occurring. You're going to have pipes that can capture the methane gas that can be burned off and then used as a fuel. Okay, incineration is a different option. Instead of burying trash, we can burn it. So that's what incineration is. It's a process of burning waste materials to reduce its volume and mass, and sometimes to even do what we call waste to energy. You can actually burn it to generate electricity and heat. And this shows how this process would actually occur. So the first step here, it says your waste is dumped into a refuse bunker, and the crane is going to move the material from the bunker to the hopper, and then that's going to release it into the incineration chamber. So the waste is burned in the incineration chamber. One of the issues with incineration we're going to learn about here in a second is that it's dirty. It gives off lots of particulates and ashes. So luckily we can have apparatus like a baghouse filter that we've learned about in our air pollution chapter that can collect the ash before the emissions are given off from the incineration facility. And then number 5, it says a baghouse filter helps to clean the air, which we just talked about. And then number 6, the heat energy can be used to create steam and generate electricity when the steam turns the turbine. They don't show that in this picture, but that is a nice little product that we can get from this, from doing incineration. We can actually burn trash, burn waste, and then create electricity from that via steam. Problems with incineration, again, we just talked about this. It's going to burn dirty, so it's going to give off particulates or ash. Even worse, sometimes that ash can contain toxic chemicals, so the disposal of the ash can be tricky. You'd have to send it to a hazardous waste site. And this can happen because, if you're burning trash, you don't know what exactly you're burning. You could be burning metals that have toxic chemicals in them, so that's a real issue there. Sometimes we can use ash for filling in roads and making cement. Those are some of the uses of ash. Incineration generates a lot of waste heat. However, we can sometimes use this to generate electricity, which is known as the waste to energy system, which we just talked about. Okay, other problems with incineration, it releases air pollution. Incineration requires lots of trash to continue operating, so it says therefore it may not actually discourage waste generation. It might be one of those things like, oh, okay, well, we can use our trash to burn and make electricity, so it's not that great of an incentive to cut back on our waste. Also, incinerators are costly to build, and they're more going to have higher fees than the tipping fees for the landfills. Okay, and so basically the last concept that we're talking about are hazardous wastes. Hazardous waste would be any sort of material, liquid, solid, gas, or sludge that's harmful to humans or ecosystems. Most of these are byproducts from industrial processes like making textiles, cleaning machines, manufacturing of computer parts and other electronics. As far as small businesses go, like in our local communities, places like dry cleaners, auto service stations, and small farms are going to be some of your largest generators of hazardous waste. And even in our households, you have plenty of hazardous waste that come out of your own households, and we're going to do a little like an audit, self-exploration activity to see what sort of things that we have in your own homes. Oven cleaners, batteries, lawn fertilizers, these types of things are also hazardous waste. They should not be sent to the landfill. They need to go to their own special site. So, how do we collect hazardous waste? It says collection of hazardous waste must occur at special sites. People are usually asked to set them aside and wait for collections or bring to appropriate places for drop-offs. We do have some hazardous waste drop-offs in our county, and I can show you those in class. Certain things like batteries and electronics you can drop off at various places in the community, like Staples, Best Buy. I think even Target accepts a lot of that stuff. Collection sites for hazardous waste must be staffed with specially trained personnel, and the hazardous waste must be treated to make it less environmentally harmful before it's disposed of. Hazardous wastes are expensive to dispose of, and there's really no good way of doing it because, again, one of the themes that we're learning about in this unit is there is no way. Even when we send our trash to a landfill and it's buried, it's still there. It can still leach back into our ecosystem. Same thing with these hazardous wastes. So really the best thing to do with hazardous waste is to prevent even using them in the first place. So it says don't create them in the first place, and we can use less toxic substances and substitutes in the home and in other facilities as well. Now, unfortunately, realistically, there are some substances that have to be used in the medical field and in manufacturing and stuff. So a lot of the stuff there's no way of getting around it, but it's saying anything that we can use less toxic substances for, we should be doing that. Okay, and then making sure that you're knowledgeable and aware of what is a hazardous waste, what should go to landfill and what should not. And again, we're going to look at an actual list in class. Okay, so laws in dealing with hazardous waste. We have two main ones. One of them is called the RCRA, and this stands for the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. This is known as the Cradle to Grave Tracking System. It's going to track hazardous waste their entire lifespan until they are properly disposed of. And the goal of this is to design or reduce or eliminate hazardous waste. Okay, and again, since it's this cradle to grave thing, we want to make sure that we're tracking and properly disposing of hazardous waste so that they don't get sent to landfills and they don't have as high of a potential to leach back into the environment. And here it says amendments have given law enforcement authority in punishing violators. Okay, probably your more well-known law when we're talking about hazardous waste is the Superfund law, and this has a big long name to it. It's called the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, or CERCLA. It was passed into law around the same time as the Love Canal tragedy in New York, and we'll revisit that, I think, on the next slide, in case you forgot what happened there. And so what this does is it puts taxes on chemical and petroleum industries, and the revenue that they get from these taxes is used to clean up abandoned and non-operating hazardous waste sites where a responsible party cannot be found. So it's a federal thing. It says it requires the federal government to respond directly to the release of substances that may pose a threat to human health or the environment. And with this, we maintain an NPL, which stands for a National Priorities List of contaminated sites that are eligible for funds. So we've got this list of places all over the country that have had hazardous chemicals spilled into the environment, and we use these funds that were generated through taxes to do the cleanup. Okay, so more on the National Priority List, or these NPLs. As of 2010, there were over 1,200 Superfund sites, which means that we have at least one in every state except for North Dakota. The state with the most, which, no offense to New Jersey, but I could kind of see this, is that they have 114 Superfund sites. Probably your most famous Superfund story is the Love Canal in New York. That was when we had a hazardous waste landfill buried underground. It was covered with soil, and then it was used as a site for school and housing developments without anybody knowing about this. So since it's hazardous waste, they leached into the ground. Cancer-causing agents were found in the basements of homes, very high numbers of people getting sick. In 1983, it was finally named a Superfund site, and everyone was evacuated. Okay, brownfields is similar to Superfund, except for Superfund is a federal thing, and the EPA went ahead and created brownfields for local and state levels for sites that are not bad enough for the federal Superfund cleanup. So it says that this could be contaminated industrial or commercial sites that may require environmental cleanup before they can be redeveloped or expanded. Good examples of things that would be eligible for brownfields would be old factories, industrial areas and waterfronts, dry cleaners, gas station, landfills, and rail yards could call on the funds from brownfields. Again, that's going to be more of a local or state level cleanup. This is just kind of an interesting thing that the book talked about, and this goes back to stuff we talked about at the beginning of the chapter, especially with electronic waste. It's a lot cheaper for industries to try to send their hazardous waste to developing countries for disposal, and there have actually been reports of roaming garbage ships that are just kind of traveling the ocean with all sorts of hazardous waste and garbage and ash on these ships, and they're just kind of roaming in search for a developing country that's willing to accept the waste for cash reward. So some companies have gotten in trouble for that, for just trying to dump their stuff into developing countries. And I read one story about a company from the U.S., I forget what it is now, but they dumped a bunch of stuff in Haiti having allowed them to do that, and then once courts back in the U.S. heard about that, they were forced to go back and retrieve that hazardous waste from Haiti. Okay, and then one of the last things that we'll talk about here, well, we got 2 more slides. When we're analyzing, which type of item we should buy, it's good to do what we call a life cycle analysis. It says that this is an important system tool that looks at materials used and released throughout the lifetime of a product. That would include all aspects of that product. So retrieving the raw material from the ground to begin with, the manufacture of that product, the use of the product, and then finally the disposal. So kind of following something from cradle to grave. It says this is a useful way to compare 2 products side by side. There's an interesting case study in the book that compared this entire life cycle analysis of styrofoam cup versus a paper cup. And so I'll talk about that in 1 second. So again, just some other things to think about: the amount of energy that was used in each phase, the amount of water that was used in each phase, the amount of resources used in each phase, the transporting, pollution generated, etc. Every single aspect of that product should be looked at and compared. So if we're going to compare this styrofoam cup to the paper cup, we can start with the styrofoam first. Look at some of the pros here. A styrofoam cup is going to insulate way better than a paper cup. And so because of that, you guys have probably seen when you purchase goods from certain companies that use paper cups, since they don't insulate very well, a lot of times they stick those little cardboard sleeves on them, so you're actually ending up using more resources there with the paper cup than with the styrofoam. The styrofoam cups are cheaper to produce. A really, really bad thing for styrofoam is that since styrofoam is made from a petroleum product, kind of similar to like a plastic, it's not going to break down in the landfill. Okay. The requirements for manufacture for a styrofoam cup: you would need 3 grams of petroleum, and that's really it. But remember, petroleum is a non-renewable resource. Paper cups, they require 2 grams of petroleum and then 33 grams of wood and bark, and the wood and bark are renewable. But you also need 2 times the energy and much more water to produce the paper cup than you do the styrofoam cup. Another issue with styrofoam is that it might leach chemicals into your drink when you're drinking it. And then another kind of con over here for the paper cup is that a paper cup is heavier, which would require more energy for transportation. However, a good thing for paper cups is that they probably will break down in a landfill eventually, where we said the styrofoam won't. Okay, so we've got lots of kind of pros and cons for both sides here. So there have been many studies that compare these 2 things. And a lot of people can't really agree which one is actually better to use because of that. A lot of people might think paper, but then again, if you look at all the cons we just talked about with paper, you might actually say styrofoam. One thing that's not debatable, though, is that if the styrofoam is not breaking down, it's definitely taking up more room in a landfill, whereas the paper cup probably will break down. So if that's one of our main concerns, then paper wins there. But anyways, there's still no clear answer as to which is the better choice. Maybe the best solution there would be to use a reusable mug. But there's also many environmental costs to making and shipping a reusable mug, plus the water used to make it and then cleaning out that cup each time you use it. You're also using a lot of resources for that, especially in water and heat. So these are all the things we have to think about in a life cycle analysis. Okay, and then the last slide, we're just going to look at what we call integrated waste management. I think I told you guys after our energy unit, you're going to see this integrated blank management a lot. And basically what that means is to seek out a wide variety of options and create a sustainable answer in doing that. So that's exactly what this says here. It says a method that seeks to develop as many options as possible to reduce environmental harm and costs when it comes to waste. So we want to include reduction, source reduction, we want to include recycling, composting, even landfills and incineration are all different aspects that go into the best way to deal with waste management. So some examples of some specifics for that, like in the manufacturing process, make changes in the packaging. I'm planning to bring in some absurd packaging that I've purchased over the years. One of the worst offenders was when I bought Christmas cards from Costco, and it came in this enormous box with an enormous amount of plastic and cardboard, and so the packaging was just insane. They could have put those into a much smaller package that used a whole lot less materials. Okay, so if manufacturers can change the amount of materials they use in their packaging, that can make a huge reduction in that material, and we call that source reduction. Okay, changes in the actual manufacturing process, so making goods that can be easily disassembled and the parts can be reused, or making more durable items that aren't going to have to be disposed of and a new thing bought, which we called that product obsolescence at the beginning of the notes. Use, it says changes in purchasing habits on our part. Okay, so again, we should be buying things that are more durable, that will last a long time, that won't have to go to the landfill. We can, at our homes, do composting in our backyards, which would decrease the amount of organic materials going to landfills, and it would produce that nutrient-rich soil that we could use in our gardens and farms, what have you. And then increased reuse of items. Being creative, being crafty, finding really cool ways to reuse items. As far as the waste goes, doing more and more recycling as much as we can, again, composting as much stuff as we can, avoiding the landfill as much as we can, and if we eventually have to dispose of stuff, it can either go to the incinerator or it can go to the sanitary landfill. Okay, so that's all that I have for you for your waste notes for now. Again, in class, we'll watch some cool videos that go over some of the things we talked about, and then we will also enjoy our landfill field trip.